have to fear Him.
In war, there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
You find your way to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton, and we're talking about things from both a biblical and a historical point of view, looking at things that impact the culture and influence the culture, and how do you get a nation where your family, where you want to raise your family. David, a lot of the things that we have here in America we take for granted. I think we forget how blessed we are, even when times are tough. I'm not ignoring the fact that, we got our challenges in our country. But, boy, we got it pretty good.
Yeah, we do take a lot of things for granted. And there was something I learned from Dr. Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration, that in thanking God for all the blessings he had, one of the things he said, it just stopped me. It just slapped me. He said, I thank God for all the times I have not fallen downstairs. And I say, what? And I got to thinking about that and said, it's really the things you don't notice that are some of the biggest blessings. If you fall down the stairs, that's when you notice it, but that's no blessing. Now, how many thousands of times have I gone downstairs and never fallen? And I never thought about thanking God for that. Well, that's some of your biggest blessings, is you enjoy lots of things that you take for granted until you lose them. But in America, my gosh, we've got so much freedom. Regardless of what we all say about the direction the country's headed, we still have more freedom than any other nation in the world. We still have greater prosperity. We still have greater liberties. We still have more opportunities. We're so far ahead of anybody else. Now, we are declining rapidly, going down. But my gosh, to think about what we have. And so, as a result, we're just accustomed to living the way we have it now. We're like those in the Bible who forgot what it was like back before. When you were the generation that was the second or third generation of the Promised Land, you forgot what it was like to be in the wilderness. You forgot what it was like to have manna every day to live on. Because now you're in the Promised Land. You got these huge grapes and huge plants and huge animals and all this stuff to supply. And so that's where we are as Americans. And we really don't use our imagination anymore. One of the things I loved about early American education was there was biographical stories as the basis of history. So when you studied the American Revolution, you did so not by studying a series of battles and the dates and the movement of troops. You studied it by reading the life of George Washington. You studied it by reading the life of Abigail Adams. You studied it by reading about the life of Wentworth Cheswell and all these great patriots. And then you learned all about everything, but you were in their shoes, and you were there at Valley Forge, and you had to think about what it was like. And you were with Abigail and the culture of her day and the limitations she had and what she did with that. And so imagination was really good. And I've got to say that some old school type media stuff is really, really good because it lacks special effects, but it makes you use your imagination. And I'll go back to some really old Disney classics that have always stuck with me, things like Johnny Tremaine. And Johnny Tremaine, the story of a young boy in the American Revolution, and he's watching Sam Adams and John Hancock, and he's watching Otis and all these guys that are patriots. And I thought, well, what would it have been like if I'd been that kid in the American Revolution? Well, and I used my imagination. You get a whole different view of what it was like to fight for liberties and what liberties you didn't have. And there's another one called Dr. Syn, S-Y-N, alias a Scarecrow, another Disney classic, 3 great episodes of this preacher who in the daytime is a pacifist preacher, but at nighttime he leads the patriots out to take on the tyranny of the British. And thinking, what would it have been like to live back then and have to have authorities say one thing so they don't come after you, but at nighttime and so the imagination, Swamp Fox, I think it was 6 or 8 episodes with Leslie Nielsen, and you get Unconquered with Gary Cooper. Cecil B. DeMille did that movie, and you get The Patriot with Mel Gibson. Those are movies where you can use your imagination. And so we're so accustomed here in America to having had liberty for generations that we don't know what it's like to be back in the founding era and to be back without those liberties and to not have any of them and to want to fight for them. And then once you get them, how do you secure them? How do you keep them safe? How do you make sure you pass them on for generations to come? And that literally is what's happening across the world right now, is other nations are trying to figure out what to do with liberty, what to do with freedom. How do you get it? How do you even enjoy it for the first time? Some of these nations have been hundreds of years under tyranny and recently have broken free. And so how do you establish something that works? Because most nations don't establish something that works. And so in my case, I recently was in one of those nations. We were asked to come to the Ukraine and teach about the principles that America was founded on, so that maybe they could make it work over there in the Ukraine, where they've gone 400 years as a Russian subsidiary, and they haven't had freedom in centuries, and now they've got it. And so what do you do with it? And I hadn't really thought about it, but it took me back to some of those old movies I'd seen, and so Dale Armstrong is the guy who helped get us over to Ukraine and interface with the prime minister and political leaders in Ukraine and parliamentarians and leading pastors and others. And Dale, I think, has some good word for all of us as Americans to try to remember what it's like when you don't have the liberties that we take for granted today.
And he's over there serving those folks right now, trying to minister to those that are trying to secure that very freedom. Has a very powerful perspective to share with us. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Pastor Dale Armstrong here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Crime is one of America's most serious problems today. Its effects reach not only the direct victims of its violence, but even those who have not been attacked. The concern for crime has not been limited to this century, however. Our founding fathers were also concerned about it. Yet the effects of crime unquestionably were much less in their generation. So what was their deterrent to crime? Signer of the Constitution, James McHenry, answered that question. He explained, "The Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace. In vain, without the Bible, we increase penal laws and draw protections around our institutions. Bibles are strong defenses. Where they abound, men cannot pursue wicked courses." Founding Father James McHenry believed that widely teaching the Bible was the best means to deter crime.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to the intersection of faith and politics, WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Our guest today is Pastor Dale Armstrong. He is in the Ukraine. He's part of a great pastors network that does mission work around the country. And Pastor Armstrong, we appreciate you taking time to come on the program today.
Well, it's my privilege, Rick. Appreciate you bringing us the opportunity to share some of the things that's happening over here.
Well, David has been talking about what you guys are doing and just amazing work for the Lord, but in a very, very tough situation. And most Americans, we just don't know what's happening over there. We see a little bit on the news here and there, but don't really see what's happening behind the scenes. So we appreciate you coming on to catch us up. Tell us what you're doing.
Well, what we're trying to do primarily is to accelerate some of the processes that happens when liberty hits a nation. America, we've kind of gone through that in two phases, I would say. First, the Revolutionary War, and then the Civil War. And one of the analogies I use over here when I interface with political leaders or spiritual leaders is, I describe how Abraham Lincoln set the slaves free in the mid-1800s, but it was 70 years later before Rosa Parks actually stood up on her rights. And that's what we're seeing happen since the collapse of the former Soviet Union, and the mindset of the people has been impregnated with that old Soviet mentality. And God's peeling the blinders off of so many eyes, Rick.
Yeah, I remember David and several others came over with you. I guess has it been almost a year? It's been a few months anyway, I know.
It was June of this year.
June of this year, okay. He said that it was amazing what God was doing in terms of the leaders and the lives of the leaders, and that so many good seeds were being planted. What is it like to have leaders that are looking for a formula that works and has God in the formula when they're coming out of a system that left God out of the formula for so long?
Well, it's inspiring in a degree. It's just difficult to explain. And for those that were here and those that have walked on Maidan and have seen the actual processes of history and liberty, it's breathtaking. It stirs me to be more of a patriotic towards what happened in America in 1776. And it amazes me now because it's so applicable to where we're at that we're not learning the lessons of what the socialism in the Soviet Empire did, what the centralized government did, what the education system did, and unfortunately I see us following that path in America. So to come over here and to see the birth of a new nation, it's life-changing. There were so many parallels between what went on in 1776 and what happened here beginning in November of last year. It's mind-boggling. I was hoping maybe we could even discuss some of those parallels.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's interesting for those who are students of American history. You know, we know of that it was a process, and
didn't happen overnight.
They did not happen overnight, and there were a lot of preparatory things. There was revival in America. There was a leadership base that was raised up through the churches. The major universities of the day were all Christian universities. Yale and Harvard were seminaries. And so when they did hit the crisis, it was spiritual leaders that really came to the forefront. And they were dealing with a monarchy. They were dealing with totalitarian government and corruption and tyranny. And they began to wrestle with the idea, can you actually rebel righteously? And, you know, there were also economic factors involved, and you ended up with people in the square in Boston throwing rocks and vegetables at the British soldiers, and shots were fired. And in November of this year, the first meeting on Maidan on the public square, there was only 60 people. And as they began to say, we don't like this form of government, we don't like to be ruled over in a tyrannical manner, it began to swell. And still wasn't that large until the government made mistakes. And basically, rocks were thrown and shots were fired, and overnight it swelled to hundreds of thousands. And then in February, the shots were fired that over 100 were killed. Mm. And in that, the nation rose up. Yanukovych, the former president, fled to Russia for his life, and a new nation was born. And so it's interesting, as I've preached in different settings and taught in both political and church settings, when I draw these parallels, everybody, you know, I talk about this confrontation in the public square and how things didn't get better, they got worse. And all of a sudden they were at war with a superpower. Well, for us it was Britain, and here they are at war with Russia. We were unprepared. We didn't have a standing army. We had volunteers. That's what's happening here, Rick. The majority of the fighting are volunteer battalions. Most of them are supplied by churches. Literally, their uniforms, their ammo, their medicine, they're being provided through voluntary channels. And they're standing toe-to-toe with us, world superpower. Unfortunately, in America, we're not helping so much at this point. And I know that's my prayer, that some people will be listening and influence their political leaders to bring some military aid here to at least allow them to defend themselves. And as it was in the Revolutionary War, they came to a very bitter winter. And I think if we draw the parallel, right now Ukraine's in a valley forge. They're facing a terrible winter. Their gas supplies are low. Their army doesn't have the winter gear they need. Food supplies are low. I mean, water purification tablets are low. Blood clot and bandages are low. It's a difficult situation, but these people have been set free, and they're not going backwards.
The Pastors Network that you're a part of, the American Pastors Network, you guys have the Ukraine Initiative, Out of the Ashes, Freedom Reborn. Tell us how folks can come alongside you and just helping to you know, feed the needy and to help the folks that have been injured. I mean, you guys are on the ground actually helping people. How can folks here in America come alongside you?
Well, I really appreciate that. They can certainly visit the AmericanPastorsNetwork.net, or they can go to www.ukraineinitiative.org. And there's opportunities there for them to read, to watch some videos, to get some background as to what we are doing, and to come alongside financially and help us. There are a range of needs that go beyond the length of our conversation, everything from the refugee crisis. The entire east major segment of the Ukraine has been invaded by mercenaries, including, finally, they're admitting Russian regular soldiers. The ambassador of the United States to Ukraine told in a meeting how Russia has emptied out 3 prisons, had the prisoners sign a piece of paper that they would go to Ukraine to do their dirty work, and gave them amnesty.
Wow.
It's a horrific situation. I was just with a group of people who came out of the war zone, who were cell group leaders in a very large church there. They had been over 5,000 members. They're now less than 1,000 in their cell group attendance. But they are remaining a church in the middle of that storm. And there's no money in those situations. We're talking about sneaking through checkpoints, and to get money back into the war zone, they're taking what we give them and smuggling it in different means. And the problems there's food, but there's no money to buy it. So we're doing our best to address the heart of the problem. But then in the villages that are surrounded, there's entire villages that have been mowed down completely demolished. The separatists went in to destroy schools and orphanages and hospitals. And so there's a tremendous rebuilding movement going on right now to put roofs on houses and to take care of people. Every dime is beneficial and helpful. Prayer-wise, what we're really looking at as our focus is to bring God's word to the government in every means possible. We're using summits. We're engaging face-to-face with leaders in discussing the biblical principles of government. And the amazing thing is they're listening. And so we're continuing to dialogue. We're going to have another summit at the end of January. We hope David will be our guest. He's been such a blessing. I can't say enough. In fact, over here, he has hit a home run. There's just been so many paradigm shifts because of his several hours of teaching. So we really appreciate that, Rick.
Wow, that's so little of that is being told over here, Pastor. I've been completely out of the loop and didn't realize, how important these seeds are that are being planted, and what those parallels are to our American Revolution, and how they're in the exact same situation. How awkward is it when they? Do they see you and see America as their former enemy, as the Soviet Union, or do they see us as someone that they want to be more like, and that they're reaching out to get help from?
No, absolutely not. In fact, they recognize America may be their only hope. Europe stands in a different posture. I mean, we could get into the discussions of what are Putin's plans. How far does he intend to go, and what type of aggression are we really looking at? Most people here believe World War III has already started. That's kind of a buzzword. His aims, his parallels with Hitler is another study that'll keep you up at night. But there's a lot of compromise when you're close to Russia's influence, and America's distance still leaves us as a beacon of light. And they're holding out the hope that Mr. Obama and the Obama administration will change their mind and allow them to defend themselves. The Obama administration believes it will escalate the problem as though the Ukraine should submit, but they're not going to, Rick. They have already shed blood and have fought a fight for freedom, and they're literally, I don't know how long to go on here, but, I've been here since '93, in and out, and even I've known pastors 20 years, and I've spoke to at least 5 of them that have said the exact same thing to me without knowing that the other is saying it privately. And they said, a few years ago I was a pacifist, and I didn't care about our government. He said, do you want to see my gun?
Wow.
And they have, it just breaks my heart to see them facing an enemy, and they're trusting that America and the American public and the Obama administration will rise up to help. And that's my prayer too.
Amen. Amen. Well, Pastor Armstrong, we want folks to go visit the website today. They can go straight to ukraineinitiative.com or go to the American Pastors Network website. We'll have links today at wallbuilderslive.com to make it easy for you to get over there. Some great tools to get informed about the situations, videos and other things that you can see, and it will stir your heart to want to help. I hope we can get you back again soon, Pastor, and just keep our folks informed. This is going to be an education process for folks to even get this on their radar, I think, because it's been, it's just become an ignored situation in America now. But we appreciate what you're doing.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Appreciate what you're doing. Look forward to having you back very soon.
All righty, sir.
That's Pastor Dale Armstrong, back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution, but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the Cradle of Liberty and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. We're back with David Barton now. David, I got to be honest, man. I know you went over there. I have not, and I had not realized at all the parallels to our Revolutionary War. Or, frankly, for the last few months, the media has been kind of quiet on this. I hadn't even thought about it much in the last few months. Wow, man. I mean, I was missing out on an opportunity to be praying for people that are fighting for freedom and come alongside this Pastors Network to help them. This is powerful stuff.
It is, and I tell you, Ukraine, I was really surprised. Ukraine is a very Christian nation, very Christian nation. Unfortunately, it's had a lot of American missionaries over there who have told them you don't get involved in stuff. You stay out of it. There's nothing you can do to change the culture. You have to learn to live with government corruption. And talking to these pastors, we're talking mega pastors over there. They said, yeah, we hate corruption, but there's nothing we can do about it. Yes, there is. There's all sorts of biblical solutions, not the least of which is don't elect corrupt people to office. Yeah, but we're not supposed to get involved in politics. Well, you can change that right now because you get your choice of leaders. And you know, they kind of had that quasi-revolution months ago where that they rose up. And I loved what Dale pointed out. It started with only 60 people, but it grew to hundreds of thousands. It's kind of like what happened with Lech Walesa in Poland when they threw off the Soviets there, threw off the communists. It starts with a small group, and then they realized, hey, we outnumber them. All we have to do is stand up and get involved. And I love what he was saying about the pastors. He's, you know, the comedy, I wrote it down. He said, a few years ago, I was a pacifist, and I didn't care about government. You want to see my gun? Yeah. It's like, you're starting to understand things. But I loved his analogy, too. He said that, you know, they're trying to figure out what to do when freedom hits a nation, which is what Americans had to do. And he took through that analogy of they stand against a world superpower, and the churches are leading the way in most of the areas, and they're now in a Valley Forge. And communicating with Dale recently, talking about all these Ukrainians that are being shot by these Russian thugs and gangsters and soldiers and others, and they're just begging even for there are some bandages that instantly clot blood. If you stick this bandage on, it'll stop the bleeding. And it's a simple thing, cost $1 or $2. It's really cheap, but they're begging for stuff that's simple. You know, we never think about that here. We're so used to having that. And so they're asking for help for these Ukrainians who are freedom fighters trying to keep their freedom. They already have it. I mean, they've already separated officially from Russia. Russia's trying to take them over again. And by the way, the United States has been absolutely worthless on this. We promised them that if they would give up their nuclear weapons, which Ukraine had, that if Putin or Russia came after them, we would come help. Well, they gave up their weapons, and now Putin's not scared to come after them, and we're doing absolutely nothing. Our media's telling us nothing about the destruction of the churches and the villages and the schools by the Russians. I mean, none of that's out there. So we really have stood these people up. But it is such a similar analogy to America 230, 240 years ago. And the Ukrainians are at that point. And if we can keep them with good information, with good principles, with good concepts, maybe they can become like America was, become successful and prosperous and free. And for a Slavic nation to be free in that part of the world is really quite a remarkable thing.
No doubt about it. And David, we don't have a whole lot of time for this one, much at all, for such a deep question. But how do you convince Americans of our national interest to get involved there and to help these folks remain free?
One is we have to do a better job of teaching our own history and using our imagination. If we can imagine what it was like not to be free, and to get that freedom, to imagine what it would have been like after the Civil War when blacks had not been free and they suddenly get freedom. What do you do when freedom hits? How do you live then? If you can imagine that and say, that's where the Ukrainians are, what can I do to help them achieve the freedom they've never experienced? What can I do to help them? I mean, that's a big deal. Use your imagination, learn from American history, and then say, you know what? I want that from my fellow brethren who are in the Ukraine. I'm going to do what I can to help them achieve what we've enjoyed, the blessings we have. God didn't bless us to be selfish. He blessed us to bless others, and we can do that with folks in Ukraine.
Incredibly powerful story that we are not hearing much about at all today, folks. You can be a part of helping by helping this Pastors Network that is providing incredible aid over there. So go to WallBuildersLive.com today, click on the link, and find out more information there. Thanks for listening today to WallBuilders Live.
We stand under